It's hard to tell exactly what you're looking at first. Asterisk asterisk, a massive structure, part hangar, part fortress, rises out of the earth. Asterisk, half swallowed by time. Asterisk asterisk, it looks like something built not just for war but for transformation. As if it once held a secret too heavy for the modern world to carry. Asterisk asterisk, Nazi Germany didn't just wage a war of bullets and borders. It waged a war of imagination, of unrestrained ambition, of technology so far ahead of its time it bordered on science fiction. Asterisk, today, these forgotten prototypes and abandoned mega-projects sit crumbling in forgotten forests, buried under layers of secrecy, myths, and rust. Asterisk asterisk, but once they were meant to alter the future of warfare forever. Asterisk, step inside these cavernous ruins and you'll find more than just concrete and steel. You'll walk through the mind of a regime obsessed with domination through invention. Asterisk asterisk, giant vaults, rooms filled with strange ovens, narrow passageways with shadows that still seem to breathe. These aren't just artifacts. They're relics of a plan that almost rewrote history. Asterisk, let's dive into the most mysterious Nazi technologies ever built or imagined. Some were launched, some were lost, and some were never meant to be found again. Imagine a weapon that arrives. Before you even hear it, a deadly silence, and then nothing. Until it's already too late. Asterisk, this was the V2 rocket, one of Nazi Germany's most terrifying creations. A guided missile that could cross the edge of the Earth's atmosphere, descend faster than the speed of sound, and hit its target before any alarm could be raised. Asterisk asterisk, it wasn't just advanced. It was impossible to defend against. Asterisk, powered by a liquid-fueled rocket engine, the V2 was more than a weapon. It was the first man-made object to reach space. A technological marvel of its time, but as with many Nazi projects, brilliance was drowned by chaos. Asterisk asterisk, by late 1944, over 3,000 of these silent assassins had been fired at cities like London and Antwerp, killing thousands. But here's the twist, they were almost absurdly inaccurate. Sometimes they missed by miles. Asterisk, behind this madness stood a name you might recognize, Werner von Braun. After the war, he and more than 100 engineers didn't go into hiding. They were smuggled into the United States under Operation Paperclip. Meanwhile, the Soviets clawed at whatever scraps remained. Asterisk, Germany never launched another V2. Its wreckage, once the cutting edge of the future, was left scattered across Europe, buried under rubble and silence. But what if they had aimed even higher? Like, say, the edge of space. Asterisk, that was the idea behind the Silver Vogel or Silver Bird. Not a prototype, not even a real aircraft. But a plan so bold, it sounds like something ripped from a sci-fi novel. Asterisk asterisk, designed by Eugen Sanger and Irene Bredt, the Silverbird was a suborbital bomber that could launch from a rocket-powered sled, skip across the atmosphere like a stone on water, and strike New York from Germany, then glide all the way to Japan. Asterisk, no stops, no refueling. Just a direct line of destruction across the globe. Asterisk, there was just one problem, everything. Re-entry heat was grossly underestimated. The materials couldn't handle the stress, the physics were groundbreaking, and totally impractical. Asterisk asterisk, the original design was more than 900 pages long. Even the streamlined version failed to win over Nazi leadership, and then the war ended. Asterisk, the Soviets tried to kidnap Sanger and Bredt. The Americans borrowed the idea, later with the X-20 Dinosaur, but none of these ghost planes ever flew. All that remains is a sketch, a whisper, and a terrifying glimpse of what could have been. Now imagine a rocket-powered fighter, small, scrappy, and desperate. Launched like a missile, piloted by a man who knew he might never come down alive. Asterisk, this was the Bockenbach 349 Natter, Germany's final, frantic attempt to shoot down Allied bombers by launching vertically into the sky, unleashing a burst of firepower, and then, if lucky, parachuting back to Earth. Asterisk, the plane was mostly made of wood. It was fast, cheap, and completely unstable. On February 28, 1945, it launched with a human pilot for the first and only time. **** Oberleutnant Lothar Siebert died seconds after takeoff. Some say the cockpit cover came loose and struck him. Others believe it was a failed guidance system. Either way, the result was fatal. Only a few were ever built, none saw combat. And just like that, the Natter was shelved, sealed, and nearly forgotten, but the race for sky supremacy didn't end there. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was one of the boldest and deadliest machines to ever leave the ground. A rocket-powered interceptor capable of blistering speed and vertical climbs that no enemy bomber could escape. On paper, it was a game changer. In practice, it was a suicide machine, fueled by a cocktail of hypergolic chemicals that could ignite. Just by touching each other, the Me-163 exploded on the ground almost as often as it took off. Even when it launched, it had only a few minutes of flight time before it had to glide back to Earth. Assuming it hadn't been torn apart midair, its wooden wings cracked under stress. Its fuel tanks leaked death, and its pilots were expected to land on a skid. Not wheels. A skid. It was brave. It was insane. And it failed. Still, if you really want to see something that feels like it came from a parallel future, look no further than the Horten Ho 229, a flying wing. Sleek, quiet, stealthy. Designed by the Horten brothers, it looked less like a World War II fighter and more like something from a Cold War DREAMSCAP. Made of wood. With twin jet engines buried in its body, its shape gave it a kind of radar invisibility decades ahead of its time, and yet it never flew in combat. The prototypes were plagued by crashes, sabotage, engine failures, and rushed timelines. When the third version was nearly complete, American forces stormed in and seized it. Today, what's left sits in a museum, untouched. By war, but not by mystery. Of course, not everything was sleek and aerodynamic. Some Nazi designs were downright bizarre. The DFS-346 was one such oddity, a rocket-powered missile with wings. It didn't take off from the ground. Instead, it was dropped from a bomber midair, ignited its engine, and screamed into the sky with the hopes of outrunning anything the Allies could throw at it. After the war, Soviet scientists found the unfinished design and decided to resurrect it. Tests were brutal. Wind tunnel data showed it was unstable. Pilots reported the controls were sluggish and dangerously unpredictable. One even suffered injuries when the safety harness snapped loose during testing. Still, they pushed forward. In 1951, Soviet test pilot Zeiss took it to the skies, blasting past 30,000 feet at nearly 600 miles per hour. Then the aircraft stopped responding, it spun out of control, and Zeiss had to eject in a primitive escape capsule. The DFS-346 never flew again. But its legacy, the mad gamble on speed, was etched into aviation history. But if the DFS was weird, the next one is otherworldly. Die Glock. The Belt is the most chilling Nazi project you've probably never heard of. Officially, it may not even exist, but that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. Eyewitnesses described it as a 12-foot-tall bell-shaped device made of strange glowing metal and filled with a rotating, purplish liquid called Zerum 525. Some say it was an attempt at anti-gravity propulsion. Others whisper about time travel experiments, warping reality in secret underground labs. Whatever its purpose, it emitted intense radiation. Prisoners were allegedly used in its trials, many of whom died shortly after. As Allied forces closed in, Die Glock disappeared. Some believe it was hidden by the SS. Others think it was quietly handed over to American agents during post-war negotiations. No photos, No blueprints, just shadows, stories, and the unsettling possibility that it did work and was stolen, not destroyed. And then there was the Nazi sun gun. Yes, you heard that right. German scientists, inspired by centuries-old myths, wanted to launch a massive mirror into orbit over 5,000 miles above Earth to concentrate sunlight into a beam of pure destruction. A literal death ray. Physicist Hermann Oberth proposed the original concept, but the design was later expanded by engineers at Hiller-Sleben. The final version was a metallic sodium mirror, over 3 square miles in size, capable at least, on paper, of setting entire cities ablaze or boiling parts of the ocean. It sounds absurd, and it was. Nazi Germany didn't have the technology to even reach space, let alone build orbital weapons. But American interrogators were told this wasn't a fantasy, it was a 100-year plan. Luckily, time ran out, the sun gun never left the drawing board. But it lives on in conspiracy theories and nightmares. Now, you might think most Nazi weapons were massive tanks or deadly aircraft, but some were strangely small, like the Krumlauf, a rifle attachment designed to let soldiers fire around corners without ever exposing themselves. Think about it, shooting from cover without leaving. Safety. A soldier's dream. In theory. In reality, forcing a bullet through a curved barrel caused more problems than it solved. The metal warped. Bullets shattered mid-flight. The weapon became more like a mini shotgun, unpredictable, imprecise, and dangerous to the shooter. There were different versions, 30, 45, even 90-degree angles, but they broke quickly. The 45-degree model barely survived 160 rounds before falling apart. Nazi engineers tried adding vents and shielding, but the physics just didn't cooperate. Even in a war of desperate inventions, the Krumlauf was too risky to be useful. But Nazi Germany wasn't alone in strange experimentation. Across the world, another experiment took shape, a flying disaster. Called the Brewster Buffalo. It was the U.S. Navy's first monoplane fighter, and it arrived with a lot of promise. Enclosed cockpit, retractable gear, carrier-ready, but by the time it hit the skies, the war had evolved without it. The Buffalo was clunky, underpowered, and slow. Japanese Zeros outmaneuvered it with ease. In the Pacific theater, it became little more than target practice. Other nations tried their luck: Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands. But only Finland had success, using it in cold skies against Soviet aircraft. For most, though, the Buffalo was quickly retired. A relic of yesterday's dreams in a war that demanded tomorrow's speed. Speaking of size versus speed, let's talk about the Maus. No, not the cartoon mouse. The German Panzerkampfwagen 8 Maus, the largest tank ever built. A beast. It weighed over 180 tons, it was over 33 feet long. A moving fortress designed to crush anything in its path, except it couldn't move. It was so heavy that bridges collapsed under its weight. Its engines strained to push it even at a crawl. Two prototypes were built. One had a turret, one didn't. Neither ever saw combat. Engineers tried to get clever, using snorkels to let the Maus cross rivers underwater. But by 1945, Soviet forces had overrun the testing site. The dream of an unstoppable steel monster was left behind. Today, one Maus still survives in a museum. Quiet, still, massive. A warning that in war, bigger doesn't always mean better, but some discoveries are harder to explain. Some aren't listed in textbooks at all. Photographs surfaced, grainy, strange. They showed humanoid machines, arms, legs, torsos tucked away in forested bunkers. The designs echoed descriptions found in the private notes of Dr. Klaus Richter, a shadowy engineer close to Hitler. Were these real? Were they early humanoid robots? Most historians say no. But the rusted joints, the mechanical skeletons ones, Human-like, now overgrown with moss, beg the question, how far did Nazi engineering actually go? These weren't battlefield weapons. They were experiments, maybe even propaganda. But their existence, real or fake, adds a new layer of mystery to an already disturbing history. Next, what if the greatest ship of the war was never built? Meet Project Habakkuk, a British plan to build an aircraft carrier made of ice. That's right, ice, but not just frozen water. A new material called pykrete, a mix of ice and wood pulp. It was stronger than concrete and slower to melt. The idea: create a floating air base in the middle of the Atlantic to hunt German U-boats. No steel, no rivets, just frozen science. In winter 1944, a prototype was tested on Patricia Lake in Canada. And it worked, kind of. But by then, longer-range aircraft and traditional carriers had closed the gap. And the cost? Astronomical. Just building refrigeration for the full version would have consumed more steel than dozens of real ships. So the plan melted literally. The test chunk took 3 summers to disappear, and the Habakkuk, it stayed on paper, but strange wartime ideas weren't confined to Europe alone. Over in the Pacific, the Axis powers had their own twisted strokes of genius and desperation. Japan's Fugo project, also known as the Fire Balloon Campaign, was an attempt to weaponize the wind itself. These paper balloons, hydrogen-filled and laced with small incendiary or anti-personnel bombs, were launched into the jet stream with one goal: drift silently across the Pacific Ocean and start fires on U.S. soil. No pilots, no engines, just air and ambition. Over 9,000 balloons were released between 1944 and 1945. Fewer than 10% ever made landfall. Most crashed harmlessly in forests or fields, but tragically, one exploded in Oregon, killing 6 civilians, including 5 children. It remains the only fatal enemy attack on mainland America during World War II. As the war turned against Japan, the hydrogen plants were destroyed and the balloon project was quietly abandoned. But for a moment, the wind carried war across an ocean. Sometimes, though, size itself becomes the weapon. Enter the Schwerer Gustav, a cannon so massive it defies logic. Designed by Krupp Industries, Gustav was a rail-mounted gun over 150 feet long, weighing 1,350 tons. Its shells, 15,000 pounds each. This wasn't just artillery. It was architectural warfare. The gun was built to destroy the French Maginot Line fortifications, so deep and reinforced that nothing else could touch them. But by the time Gustav was ready, the Maginot Line had already been bypassed. Instead, Gustav was deployed during the siege of Sevastopol, where it fired 47 rounds before its barrel wore out. Each shot required hundreds of men and hours of preparation. But this brute force came with a cost. Gustav couldn't move quickly. It couldn't hide. It needed dual tracks, constant maintenance, and an army of support staff. Eventually, the Nazis realized it was more a symbol than a solution. As the Allies closed in, they destroyed the gun themselves. Gustav was too big to protect, too slow to escape, too late to matter. But what about what lies beneath? Deep in Poland's Ull Mountains lies one of Nazi Germany's most chilling unfinished projects, Project Ries, or simply the Giant. Imagine a vast underground city carved into the mountain bedrock. Tunnels wide enough for trucks and tanks, chambers rising 40 feet high. A hidden complex of steel and concrete designed for something, what exactly, no one truly knows. Construction began in 1943. Allegedly for a new Führer headquarters or top-secret weapons research facility. But only 6 miles of tunnels were completed before the war began to unravel. Resources vanished, Soviet forces advanced. Tools were dropped mid-task. Narrow railways were left rusting under the snow. Asterisk even today. Visitors walk through corridors that lead nowhere, rooms with no entrances, staircases to empty walls, no maps, no plans. Just an eerie, hollow silence echoing in the dark. Asterisk, it's a puzzle frozen in stone, and maybe it was always meant to stay that way. No, where did power and paranoia mix more dangerously than in Wolfschanz Hitler's Wolf's Lair? Asterisk, built in the dense forests of East Prussia, now part of Poland, the Wolf's Lair wasn't just a headquarters, it was a fortress hidden in the trees, camouflaged from the sky, ringed with landmines. Protected by 6-foot-thick walls of reinforced concrete, Asterisk, it housed Hitler's private war rooms, strategy centers, and living quarters. Over 2,000 soldiers, officers, and staff operated inside its perimeter. It was practically a city underground generators, communication towers, air defenses, Asterisk, and yet it became the stage for one of history's most famous assassination attempts. Operation Valkyrie, asterisk, in July 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb under a conference table here. The explosion rocked the complex but failed to kill Hitler. Asterisk, by late 1944, the Soviets were closing in. Knowing the base would be overrun, Nazi engineers packed the bunkers with explosives and detonated much of the complex before fleeing. Asterisk, what remains today are skeletal ruins. Twisted rebar, collapsed ceilings, nature reclaiming a place where the war was planned and nearly turned. But now we arrive at a terrifying what if. What if the Nazis had built the atomic bomb? They tried. That's what makes it worse. Asterisk, Germany's nuclear program began early. They had top scientists, they had access to uranium. They even understood the fundamentals of nuclear fission. But something went wrong. Asterisk, instead of one focused, coordinated project like America's Manhattan Project, the Nazi atomic effort was fractured, split between different labs, competing egos, and unclear directives. Communication between teams was limited. Progress was glacial. Asterisk, they tried building reactors but couldn't maintain a sustained chain reaction. They tried enriching uranium but lacked the materials. Some say the scientists secretly sabotaged the effort either from moral hesitation or quiet rebellion. Asterisk, by the time the war ended, the Nazi bomb was still just theory, a few damaged blueprints. A box of incomplete parts. Asterisk, had they succeeded, the world might have witnessed horror on an unimaginable scale. Instead, the atomic age opened without them. So, what would have happened if these projects had worked? Would the war have lasted longer? Would history have fractured under the weight of Nazi ambition? Asterisk, maybe we're lucky their reach exceeded their grasp. Asterisk, but these ruins, these abandoned machines and ghostly blueprints remind us how close the world came to being reshaped by science unchecked and power unchained. Asterisk, their failures saved us. But their stories still haunt the future. Asterisk, so many of these machines never fired a shot, never took off, never saw the battlefield. And yet, their echoes are everywhere. Asterisk, abandoned tunnels in the mountains. Blueprints that vanished into locked archives. Silent weapons that once promised to change the course of history. They remain half forgotten, half erased like scars left behind by a war that nearly broke the world. Asterisk, but maybe that's what makes them even more dangerous now. Asterisk, because what was once too advanced to build might not be impossible anymore. Asterisk, and the question isn't whether these ideas died with the war. It's whether someone, somewhere, is trying to bring them back. Asterisk, if that thought sends a chill down your spine. Asterisk, good. It should. Asterisk, because history never truly disappears. Asterisk, it just waits to be uncovered.